Hello, Professor Teacher.
Hello, Billy.
What are we going to learn today?
Today we are going to learn about AD, AS, and also we'll learn about the short run aggregate supply.
Yay!
Let's start with aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is the total quantity of goods and services that all buyers in an economy want to buy at different possible price levels, ceteris paribus. Aggregate demand includes the demand of consumers, the demand of businesses, the demand of governments, and the demand of net exports.
What about aggregate supply?
Well, Billy, the aggregate supply is the total quantity of goods and services produced in an economy at different price levels, ceteris paribus. The AS curve is shaped like a supply curve, upward sloping.
What causes shifts in the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves?
That's a good question, Billy. I'll talk about shifts in aggregate demand first. Shifts in aggregate demand are caused by changes in consumer, investment, government, and foreigner spending. An example of a change in consumer spending would be changes in wealth. Wealth refers to the value of the assets that households own, such as the value of their homes, the value of stocks they own in the stock market, the value of bonds, valuable paintings, jewelry, and so on. Note that wealth is not the same as income. An example of what causes changes in investments is the expectations about future sales. If a business is optimistic about their sales and economic activity in the future, they would spend more. An example of a change in government spending would be changes in political priorities. Governments have many expenditures, such as provisions of merit goods, public goods, spending on subsidies and pensions, payments of wages and salaries to its employees, purchases of goods for its own use, and so on. It may decide to increase or decrease its own expenditures in response to change in its priorities. Increased overall government spending shifts aggregate demand to the right, and decreased government spending shifts aggregate demand to the left. An example of a change in foreigner spending would be changes in exchange rates. An exchange rate is the price of one country's currency in terms of another country's currency. If Hong Kong dollars became 1 to 10 US dollars, the imports would increase, and thus shifting the AD to the right.
And for AS?
First, let me tell you the difference between the long run and the short run. The short run aggregate supply is shown by a short run aggregate supply curve. It shows the relationship between the price level and the quantity of real GDP produced by firms when resource prices do not change. The long run aggregate supply shows the changes in wages in response to price level. Rightward shifts in the short-run aggregate supply curves means firms produce a larger amount of real GDP, while the leftward shift means firms produce a smaller amount of real GDP. There are a few factors that affect firms and cause shifts, such as changes in wages, changes in non-labor resource prices, changes in subsidies offered to businesses, and supply shocks. I will be giving an example of what supply shocks may include. Supply shocks usually affect the prices of major inputs, for example, crude oil. If the supply of crude oil was found to be diminishing, then oil prices would increase, and short-run aggregate supply curve would shift to the left because of the decrease in output. Do you have any questions?
What happens when AD and SRAS are put together like the demand and supply diagram?
Well, if the aggregate demand and the short-run aggregate supply curves are put together, then the equilibrium level of real GDP occurs. In the short run, it is given by the point of intersection of the aggregate demand curve and the short-run aggregate supply curve, and it determines the price level, the level of real GDP, and the level of employment that prevail when the economy is in short-run equilibrium.
Thank you for that lesson, Professor Teacher.
Anytime, Billy.